This question is to all the prime ministers. As Arctic nations with valuable resources that President Donald Trump wants, do you feel the U.S. threat to Greenland's sovereignty and Canada's sovereignty is over? And what specific actions can you as middle powers take together to defend each other against threats to your nation's self-determination?
I'll finish with this fact, which is historically, when Canada has made defense procurement 70 cents on the dollar, more than 70 cents on the dollar, has gone to the United States. Not just to American companies, but gone to the United States. That's not an effective way to build our industry or to protect our people.
If a country within the NATO alliance tries to take over Greenland, would Canada then be ready to contribute with military forces and actually put up military resistance to protect Greenland?
Something remarkable just happened in Oslo. Mark Carney didn't simply attend another diplomatic meeting. He brought together a coalition of global leaders and began shaping a new security framework for the Arctic, a framework that could significantly reshape Canada's relationship with the United States. For decades, Canada relied heavily on Washington for its security, but under Donald Trump, that dependence increasingly started to look like a vulnerability. Trump threatened allies with tariffs, floated the controversial idea of taking over Greenland, and repeatedly used America's economic and security influence to pressure partners such as Canada. Carney's response has begun to change the equation. First, he moved to diversify Canada's trade relationships, strengthening partnerships with Europe, Japan, Australia, India, the Philippines, and even China. This strategy reduces Canada's reliance on Trump's America and broadens its global economic network. Now he appears to be taking the next step, building an international coalition to ensure that Canada's security, especially in the Arctic, is no longer dependent on the political whims of Washington. And the world is paying attention. The gathering in Oslo was not just symbolic. It was strategic. Carney convened leaders from Arctic and Nordic nations, countries that share both geography and democratic values with Canada, and nations that clearly understand the strategic importance of protecting the Arctic. Together, they began discussing a critical question: how democratic nations can cooperate to safeguard the region. The Arctic is rapidly becoming one of the most contested areas on Earth. Vast reserves of critical minerals, untapped energy resources, emerging shipping routes, and shifting military dynamics are all transforming the region into a new center of global competition. Carney made it clear that addressing these challenges will require deeper cooperation between democratic countries that share common interests. Cooperation aimed at protecting both the Arctic's resources and the stability of the region.
It's been a very effective grouping. I thank you for bringing us together, a group of countries that share common purpose, shared values, and a capacity to work with others. This grouping, informal grouping, but also in more formal groupings, such as the Arctic Council, in NATO, in the Coalition of the Willing. And this is important because we are all facing a growing list of challenges, challenges to Arctic security, challenges that come from the changing nature of warfare, challenges which interact with changing technologies and conflicts, both actual and virtual, that are moving closer to all of us. As the Prime Minister just said, and as our discussion reflected, security is moving beyond traditional areas of energy security, food security, and of course defense security into core strategic capacities driven by the changing nature of our economy.
But the most striking moment of the press conference came when a journalist raised the question that many leaders had been quietly thinking about: Donald Trump and his ambitions in the Arctic. Trump had previously spoken about the possibility of acquiring Greenland, and his comments about territorial expansion had already unsettled governments across Europe and North America. The reporter asked a direct and sensitive question to Mark Carney. If a member of NATO attempted to take control of Greenland, would Canada step in to defend it? Carney's response carried a clear and firm message. Canada will always protect sovereignty and stand shoulder to shoulder with its allies.
If a country within the NATO alliance tries to take over Greenland, would Canada then be ready to contribute with military forces and actually put up military resistance to protect Greenland?
Well, the first thing I'd say, thank you for the question. We stand foursquare behind the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity. It is for the people of Greenland and Denmark to decide their futures. And first point, being absolutely clear about that, being clear that we will back that with measures as necessary as a partner, and being, I think the fact that we and others have been clear, I don't want to put it on Canada, but European Union and others have been clear about these fundamental principles and the principle of solidarity has helped to create the space, which always should have been there, to be clear, to develop a better security umbrella in the Arctic, but also including Greenland. So we're clear on where we stand, and we will continue to stand with Denmark and Greenland. Thank you.
Perhaps the most important shift revealed during the press conference was not only about Arctic cooperation. It pointed to something deeper: Canada reassessing its long-standing security dependence on the United States. For decades, Canada's defense structure has been closely linked with Washington through institutions like North American Aerospace Defense Command, joint missions within NATO, and procurement systems that sent the majority of defense contracts to American companies. As Mark Carney highlighted, historically more than 70% of Canada's defense procurement spending has ended up in the United States. This meant that large parts of Canada's security infrastructure relied on American technology, equipment, supply chains, and ultimately political decisions made in Washington. For many years, the arrangement worked smoothly because Canada and the United States were viewed as closely aligned allies, but that political certainty began to shift with the rise of Donald Trump. Trump repeatedly challenged traditional alliances. He threatened partners with tariffs, launched trade disputes with allies, and even raised the idea of acquiring Greenland, a proposal that alarmed governments across Europe and the Arctic region. For Canada, these developments forced an uncomfortable question: what happens when the United States becomes unpredictable? What happens if security cooperation itself turns into a form of political leverage? Under Trump, Canada had already seen signs of that pressure. Tariffs were imposed, economic threats surfaced, and Washington's tone toward Ottawa grew noticeably more confrontational. Carney's strategy is now becoming clearer. Canada will continue working with the United States, but it will no longer rely on it as heavily as before. Instead, the country is expanding its defense partnerships, strengthening ties with European allies, cooperating with Nordic nations, and building relationships with countries that share the same Arctic geography and strategic interests. This approach is not about distancing Canada from the United States. It is about ensuring that Canadian security cannot be influenced or constrained by the decisions of a single political leader in Washington. And in many ways, that shift represents one of the most significant strategic pivots in Canadian defense policy in decades.
I'll finish with this fact, which is historically, when Canada has made defense procurement, 70 cents on the dollar, more than 70 cents on the dollar, has gone to the United States. Not just to American companies, but gone to the United States. That's not an effective way to build our industry or to protect our people. And so what we've been doing, we will still do a lot of procurement with the United States, to be absolutely clear, but in all cases looking to procure much more in partnership, and it's a much broader range of countries with whom we can partner.
The strategic consequences of the meeting in Oslo reach far beyond simple diplomatic coordination, because the Arctic is quickly emerging as one of the most critical geopolitical regions on the planet. As polar ice continues to retreat, new maritime corridors are opening, making global trade routes shorter and more efficient. At the same time, vast energy reserves and valuable critical minerals, essential for modern technologies, are becoming increasingly accessible. These developments are drawing intense interest from major global powers. Russia has already spent years expanding military bases and infrastructure throughout the Arctic. Meanwhile, China has declared itself a near-Arctic state and is heavily investing in northern shipping lanes and infrastructure projects to secure long-term influence in the region. Then there is the United States under Donald Trump. His repeated comments about acquiring Greenland sent shockwaves through Arctic diplomacy. For countries like Canada, Norway, Denmark, and Iceland, Greenland is far more than a piece of land. It represents sovereignty and strategic balance in the Arctic. When Trump suggested purchasing Greenland, many governments interpreted it not merely as a diplomatic controversy, but as evidence that the Arctic was entering a new era of geopolitical rivalry. That moment forced several countries to reconsider how they approach security in the region. Canada's response has been notably different. Rather than reacting defensively, Mark Carney began assembling a broader coalition, bringing together Arctic and allied nations that share regional interests and democratic values. These partnerships focus on cooperation in defense, technology, intelligence sharing, and responsible resource development. The underlying principle is straightforward but powerful. No single nation should dominate the Arctic, and no single power should dictate the region's security structure. Instead, Arctic stability should be protected collectively by the countries that actually border and depend on the region. This vision stands in sharp contrast to the unilateral style of power politics often associated with Trump's rhetoric. While Trump emphasized territorial expansion and economic leverage, Carney is emphasizing collaboration. Where Trump's approach sometimes strained alliances, Canada's strategy focuses on strengthening them. Through this approach, Canada is gradually positioning itself at the center of a new network of Arctic cooperation. What unfolded in Oslo may therefore represent a turning point for Canadian strategy. For decades, Canada relied heavily on the United States for its security framework, but Trump's unpredictable policies pushed Ottawa to reconsider that dependence. Carney's response has been ambitious: diversify Canada's trade relationships, deepen alliances across Europe and Asia, and now develop a coalition capable of collectively protecting the Arctic. If this strategy succeeds, Canada could move beyond the role of a junior partner in North American security. Instead, it may emerge as a central power in the future of Arctic governance, and potentially one of the most influential diplomatic players in the evolving global order. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dive analysis on the geopolitical development shaping Canada and the world.